You get the benefit. I'm sort of jealous of you being able to sit into these advisor meetings you have on a daily basis, in your role at Seeds, and talk to these young advisors in particular who are trying to build their businesses from the ground up. And as you said, they're putting all these incredible things in place, the foundational elements. They really understand, I need to hone a persona. I need to know who I'm selling to, right? And that's
Hmm.
true of any business. And I'll come back to your point on, how we think about it at Seeds for ourselves. But they know what persona. They start to figure out, okay, how does my offering, what problem does that persona have? How does my offering match that? What's my brand identity to kind of tell that story to the market? And what I think is sort of maybe ironic to the theme of our podcast about how important those foundational principles are. At the end of the day, you just said it, but there's an element of just scrappiness that's really needed to get initial momentum. And back on
Hmm.
that stat, again, 9 out of 10, especially for advisors who are, attempting to really kind of do it out on their own in the beginning of their career, dragging people into the door and creating revenue pretty much however possible so that you can sustain and continue to build and continue to calibrate, I think is the sort of intangible that advisors, or again, any person starting a new business, doesn't realize quite how important and difficult that is, right? And the scrappiness that's necessary to literally just figure out, how do I get a flippin' paying customer in the door to create
Right.
initial traction and move the ball forward? So yeah, that's, again, you're in these conversations every day with these advisors. You can have a beautiful website, but at the end of the day, how do you get that initial momentum, kind of get things rolling, and then everything can kind of build from there and calibrate from there.
Yeah. I think that, a lot of the advisors that I talk to who are very early on, they do start with people that they know, which I think is the advice that is given across, all industries, not all, but most industries. So in startups, it's the same thing. You really want to start where you can and keep that cost of acquisition low. You don't want to just start with marketing out into the void of the internet and try to attract that first customer that way, because, well, for a number of reasons. One is, if you can start with a friend or a family member or someone that already has some trust in you, then you have room to kind of test things and really make sure that, and they'll be more honest with you on feedback versus just leaving and going to the advisor down the street. So there's a lot of benefits from starting there. But I do think and most advisors, I think, do this very well. I do think that most advisors I talk to, it's not like I talk to a lot of advisors who don't have any clients at all. I think for what I notice the most is making that transition from having a few or a small set of friends and family customers, maybe a few referrals, to creating a sustainable like inbound source of prospects and leads, which is a very big topic. There's a lot that goes into that, which I'm sure we'll dive into a lot of elements of this in future episodes. But one thing that's so important, I think personally, is just making sure, whether you're in a startup or an advisory business, that those first few customers are informing the experience and the offering that you will then be pitching and marketing and selling and delivering more broadly as you grow. But before we dive into all of that, I do want to say there are a lot of advisors I talk to who aren't looking to grow beyond their own, what they can handle as an advisor. They're not looking to do what we talk a lot about in this podcast, which is kind of continue to grow and build and scale. So this doesn't necessarily apply to every advisor. I just want to call that out. If that's not your goal, to grow kind of beyond your own, what you can manage, this may not apply to you, because you may very well be able to make it off of just friends and family and a few referrals here and there. But yeah, I think that's the thing that's the most interesting to me, that I'm seeing a lot of, which is like, I've got this far, but how do I take it to the next level and actually get leads and work those leads and convert them into customers?
Yeah, there's so much, I think we can come back to kind of like the silver bullet. There's all like some piece of technology, and we've touched on this before, but some piece of technology is going to solve my sort of lead generation problem from the get
Right.
go. Right. So if I build it, they will come, or maybe I just need one more sort of, marketing lead gen tool I'll pay for to start to get them in the door. And I do think, again, those initial moments and the scrappiness to just find people to test this
Mhm.
thing that you're building, and hopefully the added benefit of putting some revenue onto the books as well to sustain and continue to calibrate, is the that untangible intangible, really difficult thing at the beginning that, again, I think the industry kind of has a tendency to overlook the degree of difficulty and how scrappy in many cases you need to be. I want to point out too, you pointed out the friends and family thing, right? It's like literally who's in your immediate network where you can say, hey, I'm
Mhm.
building this thing, whether it's an RIA or anything, or a startup like Seeds. Uh, will you be a user and help
Mhm.
me try to figure out exactly what I am building or how I should be calibrating what I'm building moving forward? So there's no shame in that game, right? I think
Mhm.
advisors have a tendency, and again, just people in the startup world have a tendency to say like, oh, those don't count, right? Like if I'm
Mhm.
wrangling initial customers because they're blood relatives, then it doesn't move the needle, and maybe investors don't think it counts, or and you get down on yourself in that way. And I don't think that's the case. I have no shame, and we're very public and honest about our wealth management business was the first customer of Seeds, right? It was the
Mhm.
first user of what we're building at Seeds. No shame in that. It's been an amazing jumping off point. We're extremely lucky in that regard, right? I always have to point that out. Uh, but what an amazing start. And I don't discount the value of that. In fact, it's informed so many things about how we're building the platform to now serve and get momentum and serve advisors moving forward.